Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, this is actually an amendment that is brutal. It's not a happy place to go, but I'm trying to be intellectually honest here. Every dime we vote on as members of Congress is now borrowed. Remember, last fiscal year we borrowed 8.4% of GDP. Every dime of military is borrowed. Every dime of non-defense discretionary, which is functionally what we're going over right now, and what, $300–400 billion of functionally, let's call it Medicare. So for my brothers and sisters on the left, who often the solution is, well, raise revenues. Okay, so we're engaged in this insanity right now where we're borrowing money to send it to entities that have their own taxing authority. And look, you know, I've been the treasurer of the fourth biggest county in America. I managed the bank, I managed the tax collections, I managed the finances, or parts of the finances. I understand local government and the burdens there, but we had taxing authority. Is it rational in a society, particularly with the higher interest rates, for us to borrow and then send the money to entities with their own taxing authority? And look, I understand both on Republicans and Democrats, we despise this because there's lots of things we like. There's things I like, I've voted for years now. But I just look at the math and I keep wondering, is it both moral or rational for us to borrow money and send it to entities that have their own taxing authority? If these programs are so important, which many of them are, there is a solution. Those entities can actually produce the revenues, revenues themselves. And with that, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho seek recognition?
It's hard to get out, isn't it? I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to this amendment, which cuts programs in this bill by an additional 16%, and not all of these programs do local governments or entities have a taxing authority to pay for them. The underlying bill provides $25.4 billion in new non-defense discretionary spending, which is $13.4 billion, or 35% below the fiscal year 2023 level. The bill also rescinds $9.4 billion in funding provided to the EPA, the Presidio Trust, and the Council of Environmental Quality through the Inflation Reduction Act. In drafting this bill, we worked really hard to rein in federal spending. One thing that all Republicans agree on is that we've got to reduce spending. The debate occurs on how much and how fast. In drafting this bill, as I said, we worked very hard to rein in federal spending while prioritizing critical needs within our reduced allocation. Unfortunately, this is kind of a sledgehammer approach. When you just want to reduce the bill across the bill by 16%, you would be reducing wildfire fighting. We've done everything we can to protect wildfire fighting, which is devastating, particularly to the west where I live. We've also done everything we can to protect Indian health services. That's something that's vital here, and we don't actually do a very good job of supporting Indian health services overall. If you look at the amount of money per patient that the VA spends and the amount that average American spends, and then how much we spend per person on Indian health service, it's about half what we spend on other health care needs. So we're trying everything we can over the years in a bipartisan way to bring up the Indian health services and improve their health, but they don't have a separate taxing authority to be able to do that. That's the federal government. So this sledgehammer approach, which would just reduce every budget in this bill by 16%, that's not mandatory spending, I think is inappropriate, and I don't think it is the proper way to go. So I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Actually, I think the chairman actually was generous. I think it's a lot more than a sledgehammer. This is like a small nuclear weapon. And partially that was the point. And obviously, you know, I care tremendously about IHS and have worked really hard on that. I'm just trying to work through, and I want to put this in moral paradigm. I mean, I have my 15-month-old sitting behind me, but this is no longer about the next generation. It's about your own retirement. We have a math problem. It's a brutal math problem. We borrow, one more time, every dime of discretionary. We borrow every dime of military. And now we're actually borrowing hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of what is mandatory. And some of this breaks my heart, but I don't seem to be able to communicate to my brothers and sisters how ugly the math is. One more time. As of yesterday, we were borrowing $78,000 every second. $78,000 every second. For our friends on the left, they care about this. We care about this. It's just so hard to turn off the faucet. And the very last sentence, and then I'm going to sit down and shut up and go away. The debt is primarily driven by demographics. It's something we don't tell honestly, but we got old. If you actually look at from today through the next 30 years, 100% of the projected debt, 75% of it's Medicare, 25% if we backfill Social Security in 9 years when the trust fund's empty. Do you see any of this debate? And I know this is small compared to the scale we're borrowing, but I gotta find some way to get people to start understanding the scale of this math. Because the math always wins. Sometimes it takes a while, but the math will always win. And with that, I actually yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Idaho is recognized.
I sympathize with what the gentleman is saying. I agree with you. It is a huge problem, and it is a math problem. But you mentioned something that's really important. We used to spend about 70% of the budget on discretionary spending. That's the money we appropriate through these appropriation bills. And about 30% was spent on mandatory spending. That's been reversed, where it's about 70% mandatory spending today and only 30% in discretionary spending. 72. So we have got to address mandatory spending. That's difficult to do because anytime you say, we got to reform Social Security if we're going to save it, all of a sudden the commercial is going, oh, they're going to take away your Social Security. It is a political football that we've got to get together, both Republicans and Democrats, and address this. That's why the Speaker has said we're going to create a debt commission to look at how we can reduce this debt that we're facing. I agree with him. It is horrible what is going on. As I said earlier, the debate is not really whether to cut spending, it's how much and how fast. And as I said, this is, well, I guess you said it best, a small nuclear weapon in this, but I agree with what you're saying in general. It's how we go about it that's the challenge. So I would oppose this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.